The crowds that followed Jesus were huge at times, and Jesus actually had many disciples. And it was from this large pool of disciples that Jesus chose 12 men to be his apostles. These 12 are the ones with whom he spent the bulk of his time, training them, loving them, and teaching them. But even within this group of 12, Jesus had what's been called his inner circle. This inner circle consisted of 3 of the apostles, Peter, James, and John. And all 3 of these men had something in common. They were all fishermen and lived around the north side of the Sea of Galilee. James and John were the sons of Zebedee, and we assume that since James is always listed ahead of John, that James would have been the older brother. Before Jesus ever met them and called them, these 3 men already knew each other and were partners in the fishing business. As the inner circle, they were privileged to experience some things that the other apostles did not. Peter, James, and John were present when Jesus raised a dead girl to life. They were also there at the transfiguration of Jesus and got to actually see Moses and Elijah the prophet. How awesome is that? And in a time of emotional need, Jesus asked these 3 men to stay closer to him in the Garden of Gethsemane as Jesus poured out his heart in prayer to the Father. Jesus invested more of his time and more of his life in these 3. And we might see a reason in hindsight. Peter was the leader, and we looked at him last week. You can see why Jesus would invest more in the guy who was the leader. John also became a prominent figure in the church. He's the only apostle thought to have died of old age. All of the rest were executed. He's thought to have written a gospel, 3 letters, and the book of Revelation. He was often called John the Evangelist and was a leader in the church of Ephesus. Our stained glass window has 2 somewhat unusual symbols. The first is a sword, and this is actually not a common symbol for John. But the Apostle Paul referred to the Word of God as a sword, and John is thought to have written more of the New Testament than anyone but Paul. However, the symbol of the snake, or a snake in a cup, is much more commonly associated with the Apostle John. One tradition says that someone tried to poison John and failed. Hence, the snake is a symbol of poison. Whether that actually happened or not, the symbolism for John has stuck. So with John having such a long life as a leader in the church, you can see why Jesus would invest in him as well. And then there's James, sometimes called James the Greater, because there's 2 apostles called James. It was a common name. Our window for James shows the common symbol connected with this apostle, 3 seashells. There's a common legend that James traveled extensively and preached the gospel as far away as Spain, where he's said to be buried and lies inside a huge cathedral. Many people make a pilgrimage there. The scallop shell is not only a common symbol for baptism, but also of the life of a pilgrim. Each ridge on the scallop represents a different path which Jesus may lead a person in life. And I like that. However, it's highly doubtful that James ever went to Spain because he occupies a unique and a sad place among the apostles. And I believe it may be why Jesus invested more in him to prepare James for what would come relatively soon. In the Bible, according to Acts chapter 12, James was the first apostle killed for his faith. Persecution against Christians had begun some time earlier, and one day King Herod arrested some church leaders and had James put to death with the sword. Herod saw that the Jewish leaders loved this action, and so it encouraged him to go farther. He thus had Peter arrested, but God sent an angel in the night and miraculously set Peter free. And I can't help notice and wonder about the sovereignty of God. God let James die, but he intervened and saved Peter, who died later. But for now, God let one die and saved the other, when God could have obviously saved both. Why did God do that? This is one of the great uncertainties that sometimes gives people tremendous heartburn, especially if some tragedy strikes you or your family is involved. Unfortunately, we will generally never know in this life why God does what he does in these matters. And this is where faith comes in, a firm trust that I will follow God no matter what the end. After all, if you know Jesus, this life is not all there is. The best is yet to come. This is Pastor Ronnie Bearden. I'll see you next time inside the stained glass.